So the objection then that the chapter we're looking at, Isaiah 53, speaks of the people of Israel, not Jesus or any Messiah, is refuted on many different lines. First, the passage begins in Isaiah 52:13 and continues to 53:12. And it begins in Hebrew, Hinei yaskil avdi, behold, my servant will act wisely or will succeed. And according to an ancient midrashic interpretation, it is speaking of the Messiah. When it says that he will be highly exalted in three different ways, according to rabbinic tradition, he will be higher than Abraham, more exalted than Moses, even more exalted, lifted up than the ministering angels. The Targum recognizes this passage as it begins with referring to the Messiah as well. Very, very interesting. So there's ancient Jewish interpretation that recognizes the passage as messianic. In our day, Hasidic Jews, Lubavitchers, followers of Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, whom they called the Rebbe, from 1902 to 1994, they applied this passage to him. When he had his stroke and couldn't speak, they said, there it is, like a lamb before his shearers is dumb, so he doesn't open his mouth. Isaiah 53, it's referring to him. He's sick because of our sins. He's going to be glorified. So to apply Isaiah 53 to individuals, there are references to Moses here. Some interpret it with reference to Jeremiah. It's been interpreted with reference to individuals. It's been interpreted largely with reference to the nation as a whole by some of the rabbinic commentaries, the major ones, or to the righteous remnant within it, or to the Messiah. So even within Jewish tradition, there is some question as to whether this refers to the Messiah or not. But the reason that it cannot be referring to the nation of Israel as a whole is very simple. It's very simple. This servant, according to Isaiah 53, is righteous. He's called my righteous one. He makes many righteous. There's no deceit found on his lips. The nation sinned, his people sinned, he didn't sin. He suffers innocently for their sins. Now, if this referred to a righteous remnant of people, that could be the case. In other words, there could be a righteous remnant within Israel that suffers even though they're righteous. But it could not refer to the nation as a whole. Why? Because Torah is explicit. If the nation as a whole was righteous, if the nation as a whole was godly, they would be the head, not the tail. They'd be blessed and not cursed. They'd be exalted, not put down. They wouldn't be humiliated. They wouldn't be dying for sins. They would be raised up and high and exalted if the nation as a whole was righteous. So it can't refer to the nation as a whole because the nation as a whole is persecuted and suffering and dying. You say, well, maybe it refers to the righteous remnant. Well, problem with that, we've seen that when the servant of the Lord is being spoken of in the previous chapters, as we get closer and closer to this, we see in the 49th chapter, he's an individual. We see in the 50th chapter, he's an individual. And the most obvious language of Isaiah 53 is that it's referring to an individual. So it's difficult to make it refer to the righteous remnant there. But more importantly, let's think of this. It says that by his wounds we're healed. Now here's the traditional Jewish understanding that we'll hear of Isaiah 53. Isaiah 53 is not the words of the prophet. It's not the words of the prophet. Mihamin l'shmotenu. It's not the word of the prophet speaking. It is the kings of the nation spoken of in Isaiah 52:15, who are saying, we didn't realize Israel was the servant of the Lord. As Israel was scattered, we didn't realize that. When we were smiting Israel and beating Israel and thinking that they were guilty, we didn't realize they were righteous and godly and they were suffering for our sins. That's the way Jewish interpreters understand this. Here's the problem with it. Number one, if Israel was righteous and godly, they wouldn't have been suffering at the hands of the other nations. Number two, when Israel suffered at the hands of the nations, it didn't bring healing to them. When Isaiah 53 speaks of this righteous individual dying and suffering, and then it says, Uvachabraton near Palano, and at the cost of his wounds there's healing for us, the nations weren't healed when they smote Israel, or when they smote the righteous remnant, were they? No, in fact, God says in Jeremiah chapters 30 and 31 that he'll make a full end of the nations where he scatters Israel, but he won't make a full end of them. And the one who scattered, he'll regather, and he'll judge those nations, even wipe them out that smote Israel. He said, well, I'll discipline Israel with justice, but these nations that did evil to them, like Assyria and Babylon, I'm going to crush them. They overdid the punishment. Zechariah 1, I was only angry a little, and they overdid the punishment. So Israel's suffering in the nations didn't bring healing to Assyria, didn't bring healing to Babylon, didn't bring healing to Greece, didn't bring healing to Rome. Of course not. And when these nations heard Israel, even when Israel was guilty of sin, God heard them. But this one who suffers and dies brings healing. And there is a multitude of hundreds of millions of people around the world, both Jew and Gentile, who say, yeah, by Messiah's wounds I'm healed. I'm healed from a life of degradation. I'm healed from a life of sin. I'm healed from atheism. I'm healed from rebellion. I'm healed from alcoholism. I'm healed from drug addiction. I'm healed from prostitution. I'm healed with terrorism. I've repented. I've been made whole by what Messiah did. There are Jews who've come to the knowledge of God and are walking with Him and their lives have been changed. Some have been physically healed miraculously as well. Why? Because Messiah suffered and died. No, it doesn't apply to the nation as a whole. It can't. It doesn't apply to the righteous remnant. Even theoretically, it can't. It has to refer one and only to the Messiah who bore our sins. And I want to go back and revisit one important point. I have argued that if the nation was righteous as a whole, then it would not have been suffering exile and divine judgment. Therefore, if the nation of Israel was righteous as a whole, it would not suffer the things that the servant of the Lord suffers in Isaiah the 53rd chapter. We know that the Torah blessings and curses said that if Israel was obedient, God would make Israel the head and not the tail, and so on. Nations would serve Israel. Israel wouldn't serve the nations. If Israel sinned, our people would go into exile and suffer, and so on. So that's one of the principal reasons I say Isaiah 53 cannot refer to the nation as a whole, because the servant of the Lord in Isaiah 53 is righteous and yet suffers these terrible things at the hands of others. Well, many Jewish scholars would point to Psalm 44. And in Psalm 44, it recounts terrible suffering that the people went through. And then it says this, beginning in verse 17, all this happened to us, though we had not forgotten you or been false to your covenant. Our hearts had not turned back. Our feet had not strayed from your path. But you crushed us and made us a haunt for jackals and covered us over with deep darkness. If we had forgotten the name of our God or spread out our hands to a foreign God, would not God have discovered it, since He knows the secrets of the heart? Yet for your sake we face death all day long. We are considered as sheep to be slaughtered. Isn't that saying Israel was righteous and yet suffered those things? Well, again, that would be in fundamental contradiction to Old Testament history. That would be in fundamental contradiction to the Torah's promises of blessings and curses. Blessings for obedience, curses for disobedience. Well, what do we do with Psalm 44? Easy. It's the prayer of the righteous remnant. It's the prayer of the righteous remnant on behalf of the nation. Just like Daniel, as a righteous man in Daniel 9, takes on the sin of the nation and said, we have sinned and we have rebelled and we have done all these horrible, terrible things. Well, here, the righteous remnant says, God, we haven't sinned, we haven't done evil, we haven't turned away from you, and all these terrible things are happening to us and happening to our people. It's the prayer of the righteous remnant. That's the only legitimate way to read Psalm 44. And again, the suffering of the righteous remnant in history around the world did not bring healing to the nations. It is the sufferings of Messiah that bring healing to those who recognize what He has done and put their trust in God.